Hi, I'm Philip. I'm an idiot. I forgot to make an English version of some parts of this video, so there will be voiceover without lip sync, and I hope you can still enjoy the video. That said, have fun. We have developed a beehive, this one right here, and we didn't just do it on a whim. We actually had some pretty good reasons for it, and maybe after watching this video you will understand a bit better why we did what we did. To sum it up, I think all of us beekeepers have one thing in common. We want the bees we keep to be as well off as possible, and what could be better than keeping them in a way that's natural for their species? But what actually can we call natural or species appropriate? To answer that question, maybe we just have to take a look how honeybees have lived for the past 30 million years, and surprise, it hasn't done it in a box, but in a tree hollow. And these tree hollows come with some very special physical properties. So what actually are these properties and how does such tree hollows form? That's what we are going to take a closer look today. And we didn't just make it up. That's very well documented by scientists.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
We talk about real scientists. They have spent decades out in nature collecting empirical data so that we don't have to do this. So let's just have a look what these scientists say, how natural tree hollow looks like for bees and what the physical properties are. And it's going to get a little bit nerdy, but it's actually super interesting. I hope you can stick with it until the end. Just let's jump right into the topic and take a look how a tree hollow works. Yeah, not that one, a real one. An ideal bee tree hollow doesn't actually come from a woodpecker. Woodpecker tree hollows are first of all way too small and have their opening on top. Bees would move into woodpecker holes because they are opportunists and they could temporarily survive the next winter in this hollow, and next season they would swarm again, have another try and error phase to find better places to live and ensure the survival. This opportunism is somewhat cynically used by some beekeepers as an argument against the bees, because bees would even move into trash cans just because they can defend that place. Doesn't mean it's their favorite, it's simply survival instinct. The scientist Thomas Seeley was able to clearly determine that bees do have preferred types of dwellings, and those have the characteristics of specific kind of tree hollows. This form of tree hollow is formed when a branch breaks off. A mold fungus then eats its way into the tree at the broken branch, following the flow of water upwards, and decomposes the wood until the tree hollow forms, which typically has a volume of 30 to 60 liters. When bees discover this as a tree hollow for themselves to move in, eat out everything that's rotten and decayed, thereby saving the tree and creating a habitat for themselves. That bees prioritize and prefer such tree hollows was discovered by Professor Dr. Thomas Seeley through elaborate experiments, in which he provided bee swarms with various characteristic dwellings and then observed which one they chose. In this way, he was able to determine that bees clearly have favorites and what characteristic their preferred home has. Unfortunately, we are finding fewer and fewer of such tree hollows in our natural environment because we have practiced intense forestry in the recent decades, and the average age of our trees has dropped to an only average of 82 years. In the past, trees had an average age of 200 to 400 years. As well known, a tree pumps water from its roots into the leaves in summer. In winter, it does exactly the opposite. At that time, it draws the water down through the trunk into the root system to protect the tree from freezing. But especially since bees, with their high temperature, produce a lot of moisture through the winter and the summer, living wood comes with the advantage it does have a constant insulation value. For an example, if we want to build a log hive out of dead wood, which initially has good insulation properties, bees will push over the year a lot of moisture into this wood, and especially in winter, because that wood cannot release the moisture well, it will be wet at some point, and wet wood does have a very, very poor insulation value, and that wood ultimately behaves like a sponge. It absorbs water but releases it poorly, causing the wood to become oversaturated. We can see signs of oversaturated wood at almost every box hive. These black spots are black mold, and they're basically not a good sign. Let's get back to tree cavities. Here the biologist Torben Schiffer has made incredible interesting observations, which we can confirm every year with our own beehives and with our own eyes. We will show you some footage of that in a moment, but first let's talk about the theory behind it. For an example, in winter, bees can actively control the exchange of air between warm and cold layers. The warm air on top and the cold air on the bottom, and the bee mass is basically sitting in the middle. With the cluster in the middle, they can essentially separate warm air from cold air. In spring we can see this even more clearly. In this example, they actually seal off the entire tube because they have to maintain a temperature of 35 degrees on top for the breathing. That way, warm and cold air are completely separated from each other. These are important mechanisms that they carry out, and to clearly see the benefits of it, we have to move on and comparing it. When we make the comparison, we use honey as an energy source because bees convert honey into kinetic energy over winter. To do this, they eat the honey and then they start vibrating, which generates heat. And they need this heat in order to stay alive during winter. The more energy they use, of course, the worse it is. After all, there must be a reason why they have developed such energy-saving mechanisms in tree cavities. They didn't just do it for fun, that's for sure. Now let's compare these tree cavities with the characteristic we have described. In such a tree cavities, bees consume just about 7 kilograms on average the whole winter. In log hive, it's already 12.5 kilograms on average. And to survive the winter in box hives, it's an absurd 20 kilograms. That's a significant, substantial amount of extra energy that the bees have to expend just to survive the winter in these human-provided dwellings. So we are simply demanding 3 times as much energy from the bees to survive in these boxes we provide them compared to what they would actually encounter in nature. And if we add this to the list of things that already burden bees, we would place this at number 4 or maybe even number 3. We have now been able to see how bees can interact with this space and that they can save an impressive amount of energy simply by having an insulation and a certain kind of geometry. Bees have probably mastered these kinds of energy-saving mechanisms in tree hollows since millions of years already. We have now incorporated the features of this special kind of tree hollow into a hive, so your bees are able to perform these energy-saving methods. With its insulation value, HIIVE ultimately replicates a 200 to 300 years old tree, allowing the bees to achieve an average honey consumption of about 6 kilograms. So HIIVE is clearly a species-appropriate home for bees, but at the same time it's also a useful tool for beekeepers. We can harvest honey elegantly and easily. We can monitor the health of the bees simply and effectively. We can treat the bees where necessary. We can clearly see which bees perform well and display natural behaviors. And with HIIVE, we can selectively breed these bees further. This way, we can keep bees effectively just as beekeepers do. For the release of this video, we will give you with the shown code until the end of July, the post plus ground sleeve and Europe by shipping to your order included. Now let's briefly revisit the energy saving mechanisms we have mentioned before. We can simply observe these mechanisms with our own eyes if we just open up a flap on the bottom of HIIVE, and then we can have a look from the bottom upwards into the tube, and there we see the bees clustering in the middle of the tube. And if you check it with the thermal camera, you can see clearly its temperatures between 24 to 30 degrees on the bottom of the cluster, and that's while there's snow outside. These are surprisingly high temperature considering that by the end of the year the bees only consume an average of 6 kilograms of honey. Spring is actually the time when bees consume the most energy. They have to raise up the temperature to 35 degrees for the breed, and this while there's still freezing nights outside, and they completely seal off the tube and keep warm air and cold air completely separate. Summer is getting warmer almost everywhere, and we can see positive effects also in summer. At 34 degrees outside, bees are hanging in chains, and they're either building or they're just hanging out. But the key point, we see hardly any bees ventilating, and we don't have any bee beards and anything like that. And that's really, really good. HIIVE has an extremely effective insulation. For an example, here's a comparison with the Segeberger hive, which is also considered an insulated hive. In winter, it lights up like a Christmas tree, while the hive shows no visible energy loss. But of course, we can, must, and also ask you, please treat your bees for varroa. In some hives, we have astonishingly low varroa pressure, but we don't want you to give the impression that you shouldn't treat your bees. Don't do that. Otherwise, all the box beekeepers will say hive doesn't work, you will be frustrated, and we just don't want that. Even though we have surprisingly low varroa pressure in most of our colonies and even have one that doesn't show any signs of varroa since years, that doesn't mean you will get the same results right away with just any random colony and a single hive. Before that, we simply use the buckets on the bottom, which also serve as a habitat for symbionts. Well, they're not true symbionts, more like helpful opportunists, but you know what I mean. Back then we just dumped out these buckets in the end of the season and checked what's inside of them and decided whether we treat or not. With the new board, the whole process is quicker, easier and more accurate, especially since the buckets also attract small predators. But again, please treat your bees. If you see varroa mites, treat your bees please. In this hive behind me, we haven't seen a single varroa mite since ages. Let's take a look. Even this late in the year, most other beehives are already full with varroa, but I can promise you, in this one we won't find a single one. But that's not normal. Maybe it's actually normal that bees can defend themselves better when they are not forced to work 3 times as hard just to survive in the box we put them in. A topic worth exploring scientifically. Best regards to the Association of Institutes for Bee Research. We are open for collaborations. For colonies that aren't performing as well, of course we have all the options to treat. You can trickle oxalic acid from above, you can vaporize it in winter, and if you still use formic acid, those pads can simply be placed on top. They distribute through HIIVE and this works well. And with the new varroa board underneath, counting mites is now very easy. Also, we usually say if you see varroa down there, treat, because overall we have less dead drop than in box hives. That's why our rule of thumb is if you find mites, treat. If you don't, and that's what we also observed in some of our hives, still monitor closely. Check inside at least once a week during winter. At the latest, if you notice that the bees can't maintain their energy saving mechanisms anymore because they have not enough bee mass, you then definitely need to act. At that point, you might not see the bees from below anymore. It may look like the hive is empty, but usually they are just sitting high up. You can still check from above and then you're able to see them. And if you treat at this point, they usually still make it through the winter. Let's move on to the topic of honey. Up here we have a honeysucker that's easy to harvest. There's a queen excluder and a bee escape. The queen excluder ensures that she can't lay eggs into the honeysucker, and the bee escape means it's nearly free from bees in the time we harvest. Usually there are 2 or 3 bees are still inside, but we can just gently tap them out. Now, how much honey can we harvest with HIIVE? That's intentionally limited to around 7 kilograms. And yes, that's enough to supply the entire family for a whole year. But why the limit? Because honey is energy and the bees invest the energy first. In summer, they work non-stop to fill every available space with honey. If we gave them huge volumes, they would just keep working endlessly. We have intentionally kept this so the bees can rest. These resting phases are crucial. They allow bees to groom, care for each other, and fight off parasites. HIIVE therefore isn't made for people trying to do industrial scale beekeeping as a hobby. It's for those who value different kind of relationship with their bees, which in our view is far more meaningful. If you want to check in fall whether your bees have enough food for the winter, you can just lift the tube slightly. If it's heavy, they will be fine. And if you want to be precise, you can also take out the tube and put it on the scale. And if there is for any reason not enough food, you can always feed them from above. Now let's talk about swarming. HIIVE gives you the option to prevent swarms. We use this simple tool, basically just a stick with a tip. You can easily make one yourself. Just add a puff of smoke from below, then check from underneath, and on the lowest comes you will find the queen cells, and you can easily remove them. Honestly, we haven't done this for a while and we never had any problems because of it. Every swarm causes a brood break in both colonies and a natural way of reduce varroa pressure. And if you pay attention, you will catch most swarms anyways. Honestly, we are so much preferring this over digging through endless frames for weeks to find the queen cells. But hey, to each their own, and we also can easily remove the queen cells here, and it's so much easier. Now let's move on to something nice. The hive entrance. It's the window into a colony, and you can always get a good sense of how the bees are doing, and as you can see, that looks good. It's fun to watch, especially in fall when butterflies and hornets show up, and we also can narrow down the entrance so the bees can defend it even more easily. And since it's angled, they can defend it from above, which helps a lot. Now, how do we get the bees into hive in the first place? You can let them march in romantically, great for kids, or you just shake them in, that's the fastest. Since we use natural comb, they need to produce a lot of wax, so the green season is the best time to settle in the colony. Now a quick word on sustainability. We could make an entire video on this, but here's the short version. Just because the outer shell is plastic and weatherproof doesn't mean hive isn't sustainable. It's far more sustainable than a log hive and definitely not comparable with a magazine hive, which doesn't even have an insulation. So yeah, it's much more sustainable than it looks. It's complicated, but maybe we'll make a follow-up video on this topic. So let's wrap up things and briefly address the criticism of HIIVE. Over the past few years we have heard quite a bit of criticism. Some of it is valid and fair enough, but we stick to all the rules. We have here, I almost forgot to mention, we test every year for RFB at least once, and therefore we have these little windows here. Right, that's where we can take AFB samples, and otherwise we treat varroa just like we do with regular hives. Yeah, that's not really a criticism that stands in the way of HIIVE. Otherwise, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our employee Jochen. Jochen answers most things on social media, and social seems more of a suggestion than requirement for some people, and for that we definitely have to thank Jochen. He's been doing that for years now, always answering everything super polite and respectful, and above all, objectively. And that's really, really important. So yes, a big thanks goes out to Jochen. And one more thing, HIIVE is not a bargain, that's true, because we produce in Germany sustainably, and for durability, everything naturally comes with a certain price. So we really don't want HIIVE to become or be an exclusive product. We would like to make it available for everyone, and we also want people to be able to set up several hives, because that's actually the most sustainable approach. But if we right now would try to compare with the cheapest boxes on the market, we simply would have to pay on top, and economically we would lose money, and well, then we could also just keep off the light and never come back. But that's not an option, and that's why unfortunately the price isn't a bargain, but in return it's species appropriate. You can see it, you can measure it, and that's really worth a lot. How much it is worth for each individual, well, that's something everyone has to decide for themselves. And if you have made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I wish you a pleasant evening or a good morning, depending on where you are, whether you are having your breakfast or dinner, and I will say goodbye, take care, ciao.